A crowded, sun-drenched street in Florence. Cobblestones glisten after a brief rain. The scent of espresso and wet stone lingers in the air. They say fate has a way of finding you when you least expect it, sometimes in the middle of a crowded street, and sometimes in the arms of a stranger you never saw coming. A young woman, Aria, 27, fiercely beautiful but visibly frazzled, darting through the winding alleys. Her name was Aria, an artist in a city that worshipped old money and new names. But she had neither. All she carried was a worn sketchbook, an overdue rent notice crumpled in her pocket, and a stubborn belief that someday someone would see her. Really see her. Today wasn't that day. She was late. Again. The gallery owner had warned her. One more missed deadline and she was out. But Florence wasn't a city that made it easy to run. The streets twisted like a puzzle, and the tourists moved as if they had forever. Aria dodging a group of laughing tourists, nearly tripping on a cobblestone. In her rush, Aria didn't notice the man stepping out from a quiet corner. Collision. Papers scatter. The sketchbook hits the ground, pages flaring open like startled wings. Aria snapping. "Watch where you're going." The man, Luca, early 30s, casually dressed, old camera slung around his neck, dark hair tousled by the breeze. Unfazed, his lips quirk into a smile. Luca grinning. "Apologies. But in my defense, you came at me like a storm." Aria drops to gather her papers. Luca crouches, picking up her sketchbook. Luca softly reading a sketch title. "The Forgotten House." "Interesting." Aria snatching it back. "It's none of your business." She didn't have time for small talk. Not with handsome strangers carrying cameras and careless charm. She'd met men like him before. Tourists chasing stories they'd never understand. Luca teasing. "Noted. Though, for the record, storms are my favorite kind of weather." Before she could reply, a distant church bell chimed. Aria cursed under her breath, bolted down the alley, and vanished into the crowd. Luca watches her go, curiosity flickering in his gaze. Most people passed through Florence unnoticed. But not her. There was something about the way she carried her anger. Like it protected something fragile beneath. What neither of them knew was that this was no ordinary collision. This was the moment everything would change. A forgotten house. A hidden fortune. And a love neither one believed they deserved. Have you ever crossed paths with a stranger and felt like it meant something? Tell us in the comments. Stay with me because what happens next will make you believe in fate. Or fear it. The soft amber glow of Florence's evening light spilled onto cobbled streets, carrying the scent of rain-soaked stone and blooming wisteria. Aria Bennett stepped off the streetcar, juggling a messenger bag and a sketchbook, her pulse racing with a familiar mix of excitement and dread. Tonight wasn't just another gallery night. It was a test. Another chance to prove she belonged in a world that never seemed to have room for her. The boutique hotel, Palazzo Novella, sat like a forgotten jewel amidst the grander establishments, its stone facade weathered but dignified. Tucked beside it was Gallery Verita, where Aria had spent the past year scraping together exhibitions, catering to tourists and tastemakers alike. This weekend's art fair could either land her a full-time curator position, or another season of waiting tables. She pushed the heavy gallery doors open, but before she could step through, a figure collided with her at the entrance. Man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. A vintage camera hung from a strap around his neck. He was all scruff and shadowed eyes, offering an apologetic half-smile as Aria staggered back. "Watch it," she snapped, too flustered to filter her tongue. "Sorry," he murmured, stepping aside. His voice was calm, carrying a rich, low timbre that made her stomach tighten in a way she immediately resented. She narrowed her eyes. "Next time, pick a camera over charm." The man's brow quirked, a flicker of amusement passing through his gaze before he disappeared into the lobby. Aria shook her head. Another aimless tourist. This city was crawling with them, men chasing romance in a place they'd forget by morning. What she didn't know was that the aimless tourist she'd just dismissed as a backpacker owned the hotel. Luca Moretti, CEO of the Moretti Lux Group, was incognito for the weekend, escaping the suffocating world of wealth expectations and social climbing heiresses who only saw him as a prize. Inside the gallery, Aria caught her breath. She scanned the main room, heart sinking as she spotted her ex, Daniel Rossi, holding court by the wine table. Daniel, the man who'd stolen her heart and then her ideas, using them to climb higher while leaving her behind. Focus, Aria. This wasn't about him. The opening night crowd buzzed with chatter. Locals, tourists, and art patrons milled about the contemporary pieces she'd curated. She adjusted a crooked frame on the wall and tried to steady the tremor in her hands. The air shifted as Luca wandered in, pausing before a painting of fractured glass overlaid with brushstrokes of ash gray and crimson. He tilted his head, studying it. Aria noticed him from the corner of her eye, irritation flaring again. Why did he have to follow her in here? She approached, masking her unease with professional indifference. It's called aftermath, she said flatly. Luca glanced at her, a small, crooked smile tugging at his mouth. Looks like a city after a storm. It's meant to reflect what's left when the lies fall away. Her gaze lingered on the canvas. Some people think it's ugly. I think it's honest. Luca didn't reply right away. He lifted his camera and snapped a single photo of the piece, then one of Aria, catching her off guard. You shouldn't photograph guests without asking, she snapped. I wasn't photographing a guest. His voice was low, steady. I was capturing a moment. The comment lingered between them, threading heat and unease through the air. Before Aria could respond, the gallery owner called for her. She turned away, leaving Luca watching her retreat. The next day, fate, or bad luck, threw them together again. The cafe near the Ponte Vecchio was always crowded in the mornings, but Aria had her corner table and her notebook, where she mapped out forgotten buildings in the city's outskirts. She loved Florence's hidden, crumbling places, the unloved, imperfect things. Luca appeared at the next table, his vintage camera already resting on the scarred wood. They locked eyes, both hesitating. Aria considered moving. Luca beat her to the conversation. Didn't expect to see you again. I work around here. Same. Beat past. Aria decided to bite. What is it you actually do? Besides crash into women at art galleries. He chuckled. Photographer. Landscapes. People. I'm on my third passport. Lie. But a necessary one. I curate things other people overlook. Aria motioned to her notebook. Places most would rather tear down. Something about the way she said it made Luca put his phone away. They debated art, the city, the hypocrisy of the rich funding exhibits about poverty, and whether photographs should capture truth or offer escape. Their conversation crackled with unspoken challenges. Art should be a mirror, Aria argued. And sometimes a window, Luca countered. When she left, she told herself she still didn't like him, and yet her pulse was a traitor. Later that evening, as storm clouds rolled in, Luca wandered into the empty gallery. A last-minute event cancellation meant the place was deserted. Aria was adjusting a display when the thunder cracked and the power flickered. Looks like we're trapped, Luca's voice teased through the gloom. Aria smirked despite herself. Could be worse. She offered him a drink from the reception bar and, for the first time, the air between them softened. No art theories. No sarcasm. Aria, against her better judgment, spoke about her past. About Daniel, the man who used her. About how she collected broken places because she feared becoming one herself. Luca listened, his eyes never leaving hers. You see beauty in broken things, he murmured. I wonder if anyone sees you. For one charged moment, the room wasn't dark. It was thick with unsaid things. He nearly told her who he was. But then, the voice in his head, the caution of years of betrayal, held him back. The next evening shattered the fragile peace. At the gallery's main event, Florence's art elite mingled under crystal chandeliers. Aria wore a simple black dress, Luca his usual jacket and jeans. When Daniel appeared, smug and sharp in tailored Armani, Aria's pulse spiked. "Still slumming it, Aria," he sneered. "I see your taste in men hasn't improved." Before she could retort, Daniel turned to Luca. "Enjoying your stay, Mr. Moretti?" Time slowed. The room swam. Luca's mask faltered. "What?" Aria whispered. Daniel smirked. "Didn't he tell you? You're standing next to the billionaire owner of this entire block. Congratulations. You've officially become his charity case." Aria's face went cold, the words slicing deeper than she expected. Not because of his wealth, because of the lie. Because he, too, had pretended to be nobody. Without a word, she turned and left. Behind her, Luca stood frozen, Daniel's smug grin burning into his skin. And the storm outside began to rage. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, leaving the cobbled streets of Florence slick and shimmering under the amber glow of the old street lamps. The air smelled of damp earth, espresso, and distant night blooms. Aria Bennett sat alone in the corner of a small cafe, her sketchbook open, though she hadn't touched her pencil in nearly 20 minutes. The events of the past week played over in her mind like an unfinished painting she couldn't stop staring at. She hadn't planned to see him again. Not after their coffee shop argument. Not after the lingering glance he gave her when leaving the gallery late that night. And definitely not after that rainstorm confession. But Luca Moretti had a way of showing up when she least expected, or wanted him to. The accidental meeting that wasn't. When Luca stepped into the cafe, drenched from the rain and shaking water from his hair, it felt less like chance and more like fate's persistent hand. Aria looked up, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. "You stalking me now?" she teased, closing her sketchbook with a soft snap, masking the unease in her chest. Luca shrugged, a crooked grin curving his lips. "I was here first. You're just always late to good places. Must be my specialty, bad timing. Or maybe perfect timing," he countered, pulling out the chair opposite her without waiting for permission. Against her better judgment, she let him stay. Secrets in the dark. Over the next few days, Luca kept appearing. At the morning market where she bargained for bruised apples. At a tiny bookstore where she hunted for forgotten poetry collections. At the abandoned villa on the outskirts of town, the one she'd been quietly sketching for years. He claimed coincidence. She accused him of being hopelessly predictable. But every encounter chipped away at the guarded wall she'd built around herself. They spoke about everything and nothing. Favorite films. The tragedy of neglected places. The lies people tell to survive. But never about who he was. Or what he was doing there. For Luca, every moment with Aria was a risk. And an escape. She was unlike anyone he'd known. She didn't fawn over him or flirt to get something. She didn't care about status symbols or expensive watches. In fact, she seemed to despise wealth's arrogance. And so he stayed in character. Luca, the wandering photographer with a vintage Leica, a scruffy backpack, and a knack for disappearing just before sunrise. He told himself it was harmless. But every shared laugh, every stolen glance, made the secret between them heavier. The gallery gala. Everything changed the night of the gallery gala. Aria had worked tirelessly to prepare for it, the first major exhibit she'd been trusted to curate since Daniel's betrayal. It wasn't just a professional milestone. It was personal redemption. Luca arrived in the same weathered jacket, his hair messily combed, blending in with the crowd of artists and critics. Aria spotted him instantly, her pulse skipping like a stone on water. They shared a look. Not quite a smile, not quite a question, just the unspoken acknowledgement of their strange, growing connection. And then Daniel arrived. Suited, smug, and as venomous as she remembered. His gaze swept the room, landing on Aria like a claim. "I see you're still slumming it," he sneered, eyes flicking to Luca with barely concealed disdain. "Your taste in company hasn't improved." Luca's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Aria bristled. "Still mistaking arrogance for charm, Daniel?" But Daniel wasn't done. His voice dripped with mockery as he turned to Luca. You must be the new charity case. She has a type, broken, and conveniently disposable. Before Aria could fire back, Daniel delivered the killing blow. Though it's impressive you've managed to fool her this long, Moretti. The name hit like a thunderclap. Silence fell around them. Aria's stomach dropped. She stared at Luca, confusion crashing into betrayal. Moretti, she whispered, her throat dry. Daniel grinned maliciously. Didn't you know, darling? He owns this hotel. Hell, he owns half of Florence. Luca's eyes pleaded with her. Aria, She took a step back, heart pounding. You lied to me. Not about everything, but about the most important thing. People were watching now. Whispers stirred like restless ghosts. Aria felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. Without another word, she turned and fled. The night they broke. Luca chased after her, the streets slick underfoot. Aria, wait! But she didn't slow until they reached the old stone bridge. The city stretched behind them, indifferent to heartbreak. Why? She demanded, voice shaking. Why lie? His hands trembled at his sides. Because you're the first person who saw me. Not the name, not the fortune. Just me. That's not love, Luca. That's cowardice. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid you'd walk away the moment you knew. That I'd lose the only real thing I've had in years. Tears blurred her vision. You lost it the moment you made me a fool. Neither spoke for a long while. The city lights flickered on, one by one, and the river kept moving beneath them, uncaring. I don't hate you, she said quietly. But I don't trust you either. And with that, she left him standing on the bridge, a billionaire alone in a city that worshipped his name. Weeks of silence. The days that followed were hollow. Aria buried herself in gallery work. Every street corner, every cafe, felt haunted by him. The villa remained untouched in her sketchbook, too painful to finish. Luca vanished. No word. No messages. He'd gone back to his empire, she assumed. Back to women who wore diamonds like skin and smiled with practiced lips. But she couldn't stop wondering if any of it, the laughter, the rainstorm confessions, the way he looked at her like she was art, had been real. The return. It was nearly a month later when a letter arrived. No sender. Just an address scrawled in familiar, looping script. Curiosity warred with anger. But in the end she went. The address led to the villa. But it wasn't abandoned anymore. The crumbling walls were restored. The broken windows were replaced with glass that caught the afternoon light like a promise. And inside, an art exhibit, her exhibit. Sketches she thought lost, paintings she'd tucked away, even the fragile pieces she'd never shown anyone. And at the center, Luca. No suit. No entourage. Just him, camera around his neck, hope in his eyes. I rebuilt it, he said softly. I rebuilt what you dreamed of. Not to buy forgiveness, but to give back what I stole, your faith. Aria's heart ached. Why now? Because I finally understood. Love isn't about control or safety. It's about choosing each other despite the risk. He held out a small sketchbook. Inside was a single line. You see beauty in broken things. Will you see it in us too? The night air was thick with expectation as Florence's cobblestone streets shimmered under the glow of antique lanterns. Aria Bennett's footsteps echoed along the deserted path, each step carrying the weight of betrayal and heartbreak. The words still rang in her head. You fell for the backpacker. He's the billionaire owner of this place. She'd replayed it over and over. Luca's face caught somewhere between horror and desperation as Daniel's venomous reveal poisoned everything between them. And what stung most wasn't Luca's wealth. It was the lie. The aching truth that while she had opened her heart in fragments, he'd held back the one thing that could shatter it. Aria's fingers curled around the old leather strap of her sketchbook. She should have known. Should have stayed guarded. Should have never believed for 1 second that a stranger with kind eyes and rough hands could be different. She reached the Ponte Vecchio bridge and stood at the railing, staring down at the black water. How foolish to have imagined she could trust again. Why did you do it, Luca? She whispered to no one. At the hotel, Luca sat alone in the gallery. The art pieces hung like silent witnesses to his regret. The vintage camera sat unused beside him. His empire, his reputation, none of it mattered now. He had built palaces across cities, curated priceless collections, yet he'd destroyed the one thing that had felt real. Luca remembered the way Aria looked at abandoned places, seeing not ruin but possibility. How she traced faded murals with her fingertips as if coaxing the ghosts of forgotten artists back to life. She had seen beauty where no one else did, even in him. And now he'd become the very thing she feared, a man who lied. He gritted his teeth. If he had one last chance, he wouldn't waste it. He had to fix this. Not with money, not with influence, but with truth. Desperate search. By dawn, Luca was everywhere, searching the alleys, the cafes, the street markets where they'd once argued over espresso. Every corner of Florence whispered her name. He found himself at the old building she loved. The forgotten art space with boarded windows, cracked plaster, and wildflowers blooming through stone. She wasn't there. But inspiration struck. The invitation. A week passed. Aria hadn't returned to the hotel, nor answered calls from anyone. She'd vanished into the city's folds like a ghost. Then, one evening, a simple envelope arrived at her rented flat. No sender. Just her name, written in bold, familiar handwriting. Inside was a sketch of the old art space. Only it wasn't broken anymore. The windows glowed, the walls gleamed. Her own signature was on the bottom corner of the paper. Beneath it, a note. You believed in broken beauty. I rebuilt this, hoping you'd believe in us. Aria's pulse raced. Her heart warred with her head. She should stay away. Protect what little was left. But something about that message, about him, made her move. The confrontation. The art space was transformed. Where once there had been decay, now there was life. Aria stepped inside, heart pounding. Paintings lined the walls, each piece capturing imperfection. A child's cracked violin, a weathered woman laughing by a fountain, a broken fountain pen beside an unfinished love letter. And in the center stood Luca, not in a suit but his simple backpacker clothes, holding his vintage camera. He looked up, vulnerable, uncertain. You came, he breathed. Aria didn't speak. The ache in her chest was too sharp. I didn't come for forgiveness, Luca said, stepping forward. I came because the moment you walked out of my life, everything I owned meant nothing. She swallowed hard. You lied, Luca. You let me fall for a stranger who didn't exist. He shook his head. I didn't hide because I didn't trust you. I hid because you were the first person I wanted to trust me for real. And I was terrified you'd leave if you knew. A tear slid down Aria's cheek, and she hated herself for feeling anything but anger. You broke my heart, she whispered. And it's the worst thing I've ever done, Luca replied, voice cracking. But if there's a part of it still beating for me, I swear, I'll spend my life earning every shattered piece back. Choice. Silence stretched between them. The space held every hurt word, every unspoken hope. You think a building and a sketch can fix this? She challenged, though her voice softened. No, Luca admitted. But it's where we began. And maybe it's where we can begin again. He held out the vintage camera. One last photograph. No lies. No titles. Just us. Aria hesitated. Her world had been nothing but betrayals and heartbreak. But looking at him, stripped of status, of defenses, she saw not the billionaire, not the hotel owner, but the man who'd made her laugh in a rainstorm, who saw the world in broken brushstrokes, and who, like her, was terrified of not being enough. She stepped forward. Okay, she whispered. Luca raised the camera. Their eyes met through the lens. Blick. In that instant something mended. A new beginning. Months later, the art space thrived as a gallery for young, struggling artists. Luca stepped away from the public empire, focusing on restoring lost places and sponsoring Aria's community projects. They were no fairy tale. There were arguments, insecurities, nights when past ghosts resurfaced. But there was honesty, and laughter, and love. On the rooftop of that gallery one night, overlooking the lights of Florence, Aria leaned against Luca. "I never belonged anywhere," she murmured. He took her hand. "You belong wherever you're seen. And I see you, always." They kissed as the city stretched endlessly before them. Would you have given Luca a second chance? What would you do if the person you loved betrayed your trust but fought to make it right? Tell us in the comments, we want to hear your story. And if this love story tugged at your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More unforgettable romance is just a heartbeat away. Sometimes, love isn't about grand declarations or perfect trust. It's about two broken people choosing each other again and again, even when the world says they shouldn't. It's about seeing and being seen. And so, in a city where centuries of stories were written in paint, stone, and whispered confessions under moonlit bridges, another tale found its ending. Or perhaps its beginning. Aria and Luca's story wasn't perfect. It wasn't born of flawless timing or fairy tale illusions. It was forged in mistakes, in fears faced, in truths revealed one fragile piece at a time. It reminded us that love isn't about wealth, titles, or appearances. It's about two people brave enough to risk their hearts, knowing they might break, and choosing to try anyway. Because isn't that what we're all searching for? Not perfection but recognition. To be seen for who we are, messy past and all, and to have someone choose us not despite it but because of it. Now tell me, have you ever faced a love like this? One that scared you, challenged you, made you question your worth, and then helped you find it again? If you have, share your story in the comments. If you haven't, would you be brave enough if it came your way? And if this story struck a chord, leave a like to let us know. And don't forget to subscribe to Made of Love for more unforgettable romances filled with heartbreak, redemption, and second chances. Because somewhere out there, someone's heart is waiting to be seen. And we'll be here to tell their story. Turn on notifications so you never miss when the next chapter of love finds its way to your screen. Thank you for watching, feeling, and believing in love's unpredictable, imperfect, and utterly beautiful journey. Until next time, stay made of love. True love isn't about perfection or fairy tales. It's about choosing each other through fear, flaws, and fragile truths, and finding beauty in the broken pieces.